on the computer. All right. Those of you on the recording, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get the Facebook Live going here in a second, so it'll take a minute or two before we get started. We're in Revelation 13. If you're on the recording, it'll be the new set of notes are 13, 1 through 8, beast number 2. So let me open up Facebook Live and go live. All right. Oops, I forgot to do something today too. Got it. All right, welcome. We are in Revelation 13 still, and it's going to take us a couple weeks, probably this week. I hope this week and next week. And next week we'll do the second part of 13 and the beginning of chapter 14. That's the plan. But we're going to constantly kind of come back to this chapter, but more when we get to 17 and 18, we discuss Babylon, and then we'll put Babylon and the beast together. And we'll just kind of give you a hint. Babylon, the harlot, the prostitute, Babylon, Revelation 17 and 18, she sits on top of the beast. So there's a relationship between the beast and the harlot Babylon. In fact, Babylon and the beast, this first beast, makes war against Jesus in chapter 17. So you see that there's an interrelationship. So it's not just the two beasts that we have to discuss. It's also the harlot Babylon. So let me open with a word of prayer, and then we'll take any questions or comments. Welcome, Karen. Welcome, Joshie, as they're coming on. Any questions or thoughts, and then we'll go through 13, 1 through 8 again. And I think we're going to try to jump to Daniel 7 today, and then kind of try to come back, hopefully, and finish 13. And again, let me open with a word of prayer, and then I'll give the disclaimer. So, Father, we come to you tonight or this morning, wherever we are in the world. We thank you for this opportunity. For those listening on Facebook Live or those on the YouTube page, we just pray, Lord, that you'll help us to stop and pause and be before your throne and empty our hearts and minds of the worries and the concerns of life and of the world, of our family and friends and others, so that we can focus on your word, that your word will be open before our hearts and minds, be living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword, and that you would pierce our thoughts and our intentions, and that you would transform us into people who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and that you'd strengthen us and encourage us, empower us by the Spirit to be faithful to you and to your word, and whatever that might mean, and to be open to hearing and understanding and giving us wisdom and discernment in all things. We thank you for this now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Welcome, Helen, as well. And Karen, if I didn't already say, I think I said hi to Karen. Revelation 13. So I gave you a new set of notes, and I put a new script up at the top. And I was thinking this as I wrote the script. I'm like, I hope you guys actually know to kind of read that. I know some of you do, but I'm not sure if you all do. But the script is meant kind of to give you a review and a summary and an introduction to the text and the passage. Those of you on Facebook Live and YouTube page, the people in the Zoom study have notes that have an understanding for it. So again, 13 and the beasts of chapter 13, there's two beasts, beast 1 and beast 2, kind of like a Dr. Seuss book. And then the harlot Babylon, or the great prostitute, in Revelation 17 and 18, we have to wrestle with these chapters. Welcome, John, and what they mean. And then we have to figure out what they mean for us today also. And so one of the things, and I think I said this in the script at the beginning of the notes here, is the Chris, kind of going back to Chris's question or comment before we got started with the recording, and that is the idea that this is futuristic and talking about some future time frame of a revived Roman Empire and two witnesses actually walking around. That idea actually makes the book of Revelation like not relevant for us right now. It's something that we're looking for, but it's not relevant right now. Another way of looking at it that's also problematic is going, oh, it's only about Rome and 666 is Nero, which I think it is, but it's only about the past. And that view also causes us to be detached from the present day. And the answer is it's relevant for all generations, past, present, and future. And so we have to understand, well, what does the beast look like today? And what does the prostitute look like today? So, all right, my other disclaimer, which I mentioned last week also, was this is going to be difficult. So the first 12 chapters were, okay, I think we got the story down. God's on the throne. He's in charge. His will is that God's people, us, lay down our lives sacrificially, loving the nations, and that brings redemption. And God's delaying judgment and delaying these things so that the nations have time for repentance, and we need to be faithful witnesses in following Jesus. Okay, cool. We got all that. But now we're finding out about the dragon and his opposition to God's people, to Christ and to God's people, And it's going to get challenging because it's heavily immersed in this apocalyptic language and apocalyptic literature and stuff like that. So, all right, with all that being said, questions or comments or thoughts as we kind of get started? Again, if you just came on, 13, 1 through 8, beast number 2. So it's the same notes, but I added to them and did some fill in the blanks. Any questions, thoughts, or comments as we get started?
I have a general question.
Mhm.
I'm looking at it more from an imagery perspective than I am a literary one.
Okay.
But if you look at the dragon, hence Satan, he's got control of the governments. So you can look at the beast as a form, the various forms of government. But in today's day and age, couldn't you even say that a portion of the beast is in fact the church, because the church has gotten so politically inclined? Is that accurate from the literary perspective, or is the imagery off, or is my perspective the imagery off? What are your thoughts?
You're really close. I wouldn't say that the church, welcome, Gracie. The church, that the beast is the church. The problem is that the church is in the beast. Yeah, the church has gone to bed with the beast. I was writing a book a while ago, and I was going to title it In Bed with the Beast. And I thought, no, that's a little bit too provocative. I don't think I'll title it that. So Revelation 18, verse 4 says, come out of her, my people, referring to the prostitute, the great harlot, which is Babylon, which is still Rome. Come out of her, my people. And that's John's concern. And that's what we have to really wrestle with, is the fact that we have actually been seduced or deceived by the beast also, which is the reality of human life and even Christian life, that we're before the garden, we're in the garden, we're before the tree, and the beast is the serpent tempting us to use wisdom for our own sakes and our own wisdom, and deny the wisdom from God. But it's that simple if we kind of want to kind of go back there. So yeah, we've kind of succumbed to it. So very good. All right, somebody else?
I have a question that just relates to what you recommended that we read. And the one thing that I couldn't find in going back to the recording was the podcast that you recommended.
Okay, so say it again. All right, sorry. All right. So I think you're referring to the fact that this week's podcast, Karen, that came out on Monday, began the series of podcasts on the book of Revelation. So we'll have about 5 or 6.
We're talking about a previous podcast done in 2019, I thought.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I know what happened. So what happened is I took those podcasts and they're being released starting this week, next week, the week after, and the week after that. And when I re-released them, it took them off from 2019. That's why you couldn't find them, because I couldn't find them either. I was like, where'd they go? And I'm like, oh, when I changed the date to, I was going to have them, I thought they would stay where they were in 2019 and then also be re-released now. And I did that because I was traveling to India a lot, and Vinny's moving, and he's got things on his, so we needed kind of hey, we're going to do Revelation. Let's just go ahead and re-release the episodes we already did. And so it re-released this week. So that means the ones from 2019 are not, you can't find them because they're in the queue to come out next week, the week after, and the week after that, and this week also. So, yep. Okay. And then Vinny and I are doing a new one tonight that'll come out the first week of April, I think, and stuff like that also. So, yep. So, all right. So if and everyone just tuning in, the Determined Truth podcast, determinedtruth.com, go to the podcast link there, or iTunes and Spotify or wherever else you get your podcast. The Determined Truth podcast is starting a series on the book of Revelation. And our first episode came out on Monday, which would be March 13th, 2023. All right, very good. Somebody else? Any other questions, thoughts? We're good? All right, let's get started. So let's go ahead and reread 13. I know we've done it the last 2 weeks as well, but 13, 1 through 8. And then we're going to jump into Daniel 7 and kind of discuss, and then kind of go back to the notes also. So somebody want to read Revelation 13, 1 through 8. And I'm sorry, if your Bible has 12:18, start in 12:18. If it doesn't have 12:18, then start in 13:1, because that's okay. It's going to be the same.
I got it.
Thank you, Anthony.
The first beast. Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore. I'm out of the NRSV, and now I'm 13:1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads originally on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and the great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered.
Okay. All right. Now I gave you some notes on your handout where I put Daniel 7 in the in parentheses or whatever. So like capital A under 13, 1 through 18. I put Daniel 7, 1 through 28, and I put Daniel 7, 2 through 8. And then if you kind of look through the notes, you'll see references to the book of Daniel. So with that in mind, are any questions first? And if there's no questions, we're going to jump to Daniel. So let's start with this. Any questions? No? All right, so here we go. So, and there's some things that we'll review that we've already discussed. So let's go to Daniel 7 now. And it's going to get a little complicated. Oh. I'm gonna shut that down. Okay. I hope I didn't shut that off. Getting a phone call from my son, sorry. Daniel 7, and let's see, let's read Daniel 7, and we can start in verse 2. So, all right, and somebody want to read verses 2 through 8 of Daniel 7.
I can, Andrew. So it's the ESV.
Okay.
So Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in the horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
All right. So very self-explanatory, right? Pretty obvious what it means. No problems there.
Obviously.
Yeah, everyone, it's obvious. I mean, if you don't understand,
Yeah, we were there.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to get anything if you can't figure this out. This is like kindergarten right here. So okay, very good. So let's do. We're going to go through the chapter a little bit more as we proceed. But what are some things you notice, especially in comparison with the beast of Revelation 13? And the notes, you can look at my notes if that helps you. I'm not sure I give a lot away, but what are some things that you notice?
This is where I had that question last week about the different aspects of one of the beasts in Revelation. The paws and I don't remember all. Go
Okay,
back.
that's fine. Yep. Okay.
So now we have a lion, a bear, and a leopard.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas in Revelation 13, they're all combined.
Yeah.
The one beast, is like a lion, leopard, and bear. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So if I don't answer your question specifically, Sandy, by the time we're done looking at Daniel here in 15, 20 minutes, then ask it again. So just make sure I got it. Very good. Okay. So that's the first thing to notice. Daniel's 4 beasts are combined into the one beast in Revelation, at least in terms of the attributes. So lion, leopard, and bear, or the wings of an eagle. Lion, the wings of an eagle, and then the second one was like a bear, and the third one was like a leopard. And the beast in Revelation 13, the one beast is leopard, bear, and lion. So, okay. Is that right? Okay. And somebody else?
The 10 horns, and one of them is different than the other ones.
Okay, yeah, all right. So the horn in Revelation, Daniel 7 is very significant. But the first thing to notice is that there's 10 horns, and in Revelation there's 10 horns. Right? All right, now this one might be harder. So look at the 4 beasts in Daniel 7, right? Verses 4 through 8. Or probably can figure out in 4 through, like, let me see here. How many heads do these 4 beasts have combined? If it doesn't say how many heads it has, you're assuming it has 1, right?
How about 10?
Anybody see
So
how
are
many
you talking
heads?
about Daniel
4.
and Revelation, the
I'm talking
combination?
about,
That'd
I'm
be
sorry,
20.
the 4 beasts of Daniel 7, how many heads are there total in these 4 beasts?
I counted 16.
16, not how many horns, how many heads?
Heads.
4.
I'm sorry, you're right.
It's 7, it's 7.
Yeah,
All right.
7.
The 4 great beasts were coming up, verse 3, verse 4. The first was like a lion. Let's see it. So it has 1 head. Second beast is a bear. It has 1 head. Third beast is like a leopard. And also it had 4 heads, verse 6. So that's 6 heads now, 1, 1, 4. And then the 7th beast, you're assuming has 1 head. So combined, these 4 beasts have 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 13, the one beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. These beasts are like a bear, a leopard, and a lion, and the one beast in Revelation 13 is like a bear, like a beast, and like a lion, right? There's any other similarities that you might see? We can point them out later. They're not ultimately critical, but let's see if you might notice anything else.
Isn't there a little boastful horn or
Yes. Okay. So the verse 8, the little horn had a mouth uttering great boasts. And in Revelation 13, I'll just turn back there for a second. It says, verse 5, there was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. So there's a parallel. They both are blaspheming mouths. But in Daniel 7, notice it's actually this little horn that's doing this. Okay, now I'm going to give you a quick overview just for the sake of time. If you don't catch all this, it's okay, and we'll move forward. But some of you remember we've done a study of the book of Daniel before. And if you're listening or whatever, I have done a podcast series in the book of Daniel. I'd have to look up and see when the dates, what they were, when you can find them. By the way, the easiest way to find the podcast is on the app, the Determined Truth app, which is, it's on my website, how to find the app. If you go there, there's a link for the app on the website, determinedtruth.com. There's a tab for the app, and it tells you how to get it. It's actually the Tithely, TITHE.LY app, Tithely Church app, and there's instructions on the website on how to get that app. Once you get that app, and then you hit the podcast, all the podcasts, it's really easy to scroll through them. But if you're on iTunes or whatever, it's cumbersome. Spotify, Podbean, it's hard to get through all the podcasts. Like, oh, hit more and like hit more. But anyways, so here's what's happening. In the book of Daniel, chapters 2 and 7 parallel one another. They're both visions. One's Daniel having a vision, Daniel 7. The other one is the king having a vision, Daniel chapter 2. And Daniel 2, Daniel interprets the vision, and Daniel 7, someone else has to interpret it for Daniel. Chapters 3 and 6 go together, Daniel's three buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are thrown in the fiery furnace in Daniel 3. And in Daniel 6, Daniel is thrown in the lion's den. So 3 and 6 go together, God's people suffering. 4 and 5 go together, Daniel chapters 4 and 5. They go together because they're both about kings who become boastful and arrogant and are humbled by God. One repents, one does not repent. It's a very common way of writing literature in the prophets. They do this all the time, commonly. It's called a chiasm. 2 and 7 go together, 3 and 6 go together, 4 and 5 go together. That means chapter 7 is really hard, but the answer is found in chapter 2. Right. And if you want to skip in chapter 2 for a second and look at it, I'll go ahead and just kind of referencing. What happens is the king has a vision. And in this dream, he says, hey, I want all you guys that are, the chanters, whatever you call these guys, the figure outer of dreamers guys, to tell me what the dream was and its interpretation. And they're like, the magicians and conjurers, they're like, hey, king, that's not the way it works. You tell us the dream and then we tell you what it means. And he's like, guess what? I don't want you to do that. I want you to tell me the dream and its interpretation, or I'm going to kill you all. So they run to Daniel's house. Hey, Daniel, we're going to need help here because he's going to kill us all. Daniel's like, no problem. I'll tell you what, I'll do it. So Daniel goes to the king. It's like, hey, king, guess what? Verse 19, the God of heaven has told me the dream. And verses 20 through 23 or whatever is this great. God's the one who changes times and seasons, and he reveals things, and he's given wisdom to me. So I'm going to tell you what the dream is and its interpretation. So Daniel tells the king his dream, and he says the dream's about the future in verse 28, and I think 29, I know, about the future and what you've seen. And then he says, here's what you saw in verse 31. You saw a great statue. I'm in Daniel chapter 2, verse 31, very quickly. And the statue had 4 parts. There was the head, verse 32, there was a head of gold. There was its breast and arms of silver. That's part 2. Its belly and thighs of bronze, part 3. And part 4, its legs of iron. And of course, its feet were partly of iron and partly of clay. And you continue looking until a stone, verse 34. Daniel 2, verse 34. Until a stone was cut without hands. Now, when something's cut without hands, it means made by God, not human made. Divinely made. So this divine stone, and of course, we jump to the New Testament and go, oh, the stone's Jesus. He's the stone that the builders rejected. It's Jesus. It struck the statue and its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Okay, so now Daniel says, let me tell you the interpretation of the dream. Verse 36, and then verse 37 says, guess what? You, O king, are the king of kings, which is a nice way of, making peace with the king before he chops your head off. To whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And here's what's going to happen. And he says, and you, verse 38, very end of verse 38, you are the head of gold. So the first part of the statue actually is Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon and the empire of Babylon. But guess what? Verse 39, after you, there's going to be another king inferior to you. So again, pumping up his ego, making him feel good so he doesn't kill you. And then there'll be a third kingdom of bronze, verse 39 still, which will rule over the earth. Verse 40, there'll be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, as much as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron, it breaks into pieces and it crushes and breaks all these things. And you saw the feet and toes, verse 41. They were partly of clay, partly of iron. It'll be a divided kingdom. So this fourth kingdom is going to be a divided kingdom. It'll have toughness of iron, but it's also mixed with common clay. And its toes were partly of iron, partly of clay. And so here we go. Verse 44. In those days of those kings, the fourth one, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. That's Jesus and the stone again, and will never be destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar's not going to kill Daniel for telling him this because Nebuchadnezzar's dead by now. That's the whole point. An inferior king follows you, and you're going to be good with that. Then a third king, and now a fourth one. And when that fourth one arises, God's going to establish his kingdom. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms. That's the stone that crushes the image. But it itself will endure. And at verse 45, and as much as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and then it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, and the silver and gold, the great God has made known to the king, made known to Nebuchadnezzar, what will take place in the future. So the dream is true in its interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar falls down and says, you know what, Daniel, this is incredible. I can't believe that God's revealed these things to you. All right, so we know what chapter 7's about. We understand the vision, and we're good right now because Daniel told us. And that is, it's about 4 kingdoms that are ultimately destroyed by the divine kingdom. So now we go to chapter 7 and we have 4 beasts. And we immediately realize, I'm cutting to the chase here, just to keep it simple. Well, let's make this as simple as possible. We now realize that the 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms. And in fact, let's go back to Daniel 7 again. It says that in Daniel 7. So let's go to Daniel 7, verse, let's see. Oh, that's chapter 6, verse 7. Chapter 7, I think it's verse 17. Yep, there you go. Chapter 7, verse 17. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. Okay, so there's the first thing. The 4 beasts are 4 kings. Okay, so again, I think we have an idea. There's no doubt John's interpreting Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, right? So in other words, the reason why we're doing this is to say, what was John thinking? Well, he's clearly using this imagery. He clearly has Daniel 7 in mind, and Daniel 7 has Daniel 2 in mind. So we got to figure out what Daniel meant, and then we can begin to figure out what Revelation 13 means. Again, note that in Revelation 13, he's combined these 4 beasts into 1 beast. But again, let's start with Daniel 7. Daniel 7, the 4 beasts are 4 kings, or 4 kingdoms. Okay, now in the middle of this, verse 9, Daniel 7, verse 9. Does somebody want to read verses 9 through 12? Daniel 7, verses 9 through 12.
I can do it.
Okay.
As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time.
Okay. So now Daniel introduces us to, well, God sitting on a throne. And we know it's God because he's sitting on a throne. His throne's it's a chariot throne. If some of you might remember from Ezekiel or elsewhere, God's throne is a chariot throne. Its wheels are blazing fire because kings riding into battle in a chariot. That's kind of the idea. But it's the judgment throne, right? It's a throne of judgment. He's the Ancient of Days. He's the wise one. His hair is white like snow, which, by the way, is how Jesus was described in Revelation chapter 1. His head and his hair were white like wool, like white wool. Like snow. And of course, there's all these attendants around him. And notice verse 10 says explicitly, the court sat as God in judgment, and the books were opened. And we'll remember that when we get to Revelation chapter 20. So God's sitting in judgment. And guess what he's going to judge? He's going to judge in favor of, well, the next person that we're going to meet in the story in just a second, and against the beast. So God's sitting in judgment. He's the one who's sovereign, which reminds us of the book of Revelation, right? Because remember, the story of Revelation starts in chapter 4 with God sitting on a throne. The whole point of Revelation is God's the one on the throne. It's not Caesar, it's God. And he's sitting in judgment of the beast. And we know that the beasts are kings or kingdoms. Okay, everyone tracking okay so far? All right, and I know there's a lot more here. All right, let's go to verses 13 and 14 of Daniel chapter 7 now. If someone wants to read those, please.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. NIV. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
All right, so who's the Son of Man? Who's he talking about?
Oh, Jesus.
Right. This is an easy one, right? This is like a slam dunk, grandpa lifts you up and you dunk it in the hoop. It's easy to do. All right, it's Jesus. But actually, it's a little bit more complex than that. So if we run to the New Testament really quickly, we clearly get Jesus, who often called himself the Son of Man. And you might be aware that Son of Man actually is a title from the book of Ezekiel. It's a title for a prophet. Ezekiel calls himself the Son of Man. It's like 70 times, by the way. Funny that the number is 70. All right. So Ezekiel says 70 times he's the Son of Man. So when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, which is his favorite title for himself, it didn't cause any stir, because the people of Jesus's day weren't sure what sense he was using it in. It sounded like he was just calling himself a prophet like Ezekiel. So Jesus can use this title and not get himself in trouble. He's not calling himself the Messiah explicitly. He might be, but he doesn't sound like he is. He's just calling himself the Son of Man. You might be aware that when Jesus was asked at his trials, now he's on trial, tell us, are you the Christ? I adjure you by the living God, which, by the way, is an oath that the high priest invokes that requires you to answer, even though you're not supposed to be able to incriminate yourself. Like, hey, that's your job to find me guilty of something. It's not your job to make me confess my own sins, or my own, not sins, but my own guilt. But the high priest adjures Jesus to do this. And Jesus says, you're right. And you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Like, wait a minute. The Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven is Daniel 7. Jesus is using Son of Man not in Ezekiel's sense. He's just a prophet. He's claiming to be the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days. And so Jesus goes on and is like, you've heard the blasphemy. Because Jesus calls himself the Son of Man of Daniel 13. Now, for us Christians, we have no problem with this. But it was a big problem for the Jewish interpreters of the time. And the reason why is because the Son of Man in the book of Daniel is actually Israel. It's not Jesus. It's not an individual. It becomes an individual. And the way of answering or explaining would be Jesus is the individual that represents Israel. He is Israel. It's kind of like Jesus calling himself the Son of God. The Son of God is Adam. The Son of God is Israel, right? Israel is called my beloved son in the book of Exodus, right? This is my beloved son. It's Israel. And Pharaoh, you're going to be in trouble because Israel is my son. So when Jesus says he's the Son of God, he's like, I'm claiming to be the true Israel, or the embodiment of Israel. Well, that's what Jesus is doing here in Daniel 7. So for right now, we need to understand the fact that the Son of Man is actually Israel. In other words, we have three players. We have the beast. We have the Son of Man, which is Israel, and we have God sitting on the throne. And God's going to judge in favor of the Son of Man, Israel, and again, it's easier to say people of God, because Israel kind of gets us confused with like, is it ethnic Israel? It's the people of God. You have the nations and the people of God. And God, the Ancient of Days, sits on the throne and he judges in favor of the people of God and against the nations. That's the story of Daniel 7 that we're going to quickly run through the rest of this chapter, and that's kind of how it's going to flesh out. Does that make sense? So you got another way of looking at it would be you have two kingdoms, kind of New Testament way of thinking. Two kingdoms, the kingdoms of the world represented by the four beasts, and that's kingdoms plural, and the kingdom of God represented by the Son of Man, or the people of God.
Rob,
And these kind of at war. Yeah, John, go ahead.
so I'm a little confused there, but so when Daniel states in 13
Mhm.
or John, I guess, in my vision at night, I looked and there before me was one like a son of man. Are we saying this is Israel, or are we saying this is Jesus, or it's both?
We're saying both. Okay, so yeah.
Okay.
So in Daniel 7, at the time, it's Israel, or the people of God. Jesus comes along and takes that language and applies it to himself, saying,
Right.
I am the embodiment of Israel. Does that make sense? I am Israel embodied. First Peter does this. First Peter says to us that you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And that language of applying, that's Israel, that's the nation, and it's applying it now to the people of God in the New Testament. Well, Jesus applied it to himself. He was Israel embodied. Does that make sense?
So, well, it does, but when
Okay.
when you just read a little further where he says he was given in chapter 14, he
Yep.
was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshiped him. How can that be Israel or the
Oh,
people
okay.
of God?
Well, it's a little bit of a translation issue for one. And that is, so the New American Standard says that all nations might serve him. Right? It's not, are they giving him worship or are they giving him service?
But we're saying him is the people of God. Is
That's
Israel.
correct. So the Son of Man is the word singular. That's why the pronoun him is used. It's singular. The best way to answer it, John, would be, let's just kind of keep reading through the chapter and you'll see what I mean.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So keep in mind, let me just kind of rephrase it so that the chapter makes sense. Keep in mind that what we have is the kingdoms of the world represented by the four beasts, and the kingdom of God represented by the Son of Man, which is the people of God, God's people. And then there's God sitting on the throne. So don't think of the Son of Man yet in the Jesus New Testament sense as, oh, that's Jesus as the divine Son of God. Okay. So here's what we have. The two kingdoms, the people of God as the Son of Man, and the people of the nations represented by the four beasts. Okay. Now, as we go through chapter 7 now of Daniel 7, it says, Daniel, verse 15, Daniel's like, I was distressed. And the reason why is because I'm like, I want to know what's going on. Tell me what this means. So remember, Daniel has visions in chapter 7, and he doesn't know what they mean. Someone has to tell him what it means. And he's told, oh, well, the four beasts in verse 17 are four kings who will rise from the earth. Verse 18, but the saints of the highest one. So there you go, John. The saints, plural, the people of God. That's the Son of Man. The Son of Man are the saints. It's plural. They will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever. So you see, the stone, which we know is Jesus, is actually here right now. It's the people of Israel or the people of God. So Daniel's like, well, I want to know the meaning of the fourth beast in verse 19. Because it's like really bad. And we skipped a couple verses, I think, at the end, how bad it was. Let's skip down now in verse 21. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints or the people of God. And again, saints, there's translation issues here, but I'm not going to get into it for us. And overpowering them, or you might say conquering them. See what's happening? The beasts, and in particular, the one horn of that one beast is waging war with God's people. Verse 22. And then the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. So remember, it's a courtroom. The books are open, and God judges in favor of the Son of Man, i.e. the saints. So does that make sense more now, John, and anybody else that might have questions there? Why the Son of Man is actually plural. It's the saints. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
No problem. And then verse 22, then, the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. And thus he said, the guy who's interpreting for Daniel, the angelic being who's interpreting for Daniel, verse 23 says, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different than all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. Okay. And I won't get into it now, but that's actually important for later on. As for the 10 horns, verse 24 now, out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise. Oh, so you got one kingdom with like 10 different kings. And another will arise from them, or after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and subdue 3 kings. And don't worry about it. Verse 25, he will speak out against the Most High. That's the mouth uttering great boasts. He's going to speak out against the Most High, I'm in verse 25, and wear down the saints of the highest one. Again, that's the Son of Man or the God's people. He's even going to make alterations in the times and in the law, and they'll be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. There's your 42 months, 1,260 days, and time, and half a time from the book of Revelation. But the court will sit for judgment, verse 26. And his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. And the sovereignty, dominion, and verse 27, and greatness of all the kingdoms from the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. That's us, if you want to call it that way. His kingdom will be, excuse me, this just chokes me up. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended, and Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming. My face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. All right. Because Daniel doesn't know what this means, right? I mean, remember, Daniel's not told ultimately what all this means. He's got an idea what it means, but he's describing what's going to happen in the last days, which there. So does that help a little bit? Here's our context. See if I can summarize this, and then we'll jump back to 13 unless you have any questions of Revelation 13. You have two groups, the kingdoms of the world, represented by 4 beasts, and one horn or one king in particular who's really, really bad. And they wage war against the other group, which is the people of God. And God, the Ancient of Days, sits in judgment in favor of God's people. Well, at the end, he does. I mean, let's be honest. It's not till the end that he does that. In the meantime, the 4 kings or the 4 beasts or that one horn wages war against God's people and makes great boasts and even overpowers God's people. But at the end of the day, God will judge in favor of the saints. Are we good? Because we just kind of summarized Revelation 13, but we have more to do. Any questions on that? All right. It's not easy. I know it's not easy. Let's go to Revelation 13 now. Okay. So you can see there's just an abundance of Daniel 7 language in Revelation 13. And then let's go through the notes, and then we'll summarize this and see what's going on. And this has a really important application for us that we're not going to fully get our hands around tonight, but we'll continue to work on there. All right, so I put at the top of the notes, again, this is the fill in the blanks that we've already got. The beast represents imperial power or empire. The 10 horns are 10 kings. That's A1A. We mentioned this last time. The beast parodies Christ. They both have swords. They both have followers' names written on their foreheads. They both have horns. They're both slain. They both rise to a new life. And I can review that if you want me to. They both have authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and they are tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And they both receive worship. Okay. So that, and I think that's where we left off last time. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. Very good. Now notice, so again, the thing to remind ourselves with, and the reason why when we read 13 of Revelation 13, we have to make sure we read chapter 12, verse 18, if your translation has it. Most of our Bibles has 12:18 being 13, the beginning of 13:1. The dragon stood on the sand of the seashore, and a beast comes up out of the sea. Right? What John's first point is that beast, which is the 4 beasts of Daniel 7, is empowered by the dragon. And the dragon is, of course, Satan. So verse 2, end of verse 2 of Revelation 13. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, his great authority. So what we learn in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation is that the dragon is waging war against God's people and has been since the Garden of Eden. I mean, I'm adding the Garden of Eden part in there, but that's because it doesn't say that in Revelation 12, but that's the point. The dragon's been waging war against God's people from the beginning, right? And it desires to master you, is what God tells Cain right before he kills his brother Abel. Now, I got a loud plane going over my head. You probably can't hear it, but I can.
Yeah.
The dragon empowers the beast. The beast is, this one beast is all 4 beasts of Daniel combined. Okay, I'm going to save that for the end. Let's go through our notes. All right, verse 4. They will worship the beast. They worship the dragon, verse 4, because he gives authority to the beast. And they also worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" Right, which is this horn that's uttering great blasphemies. Of course, that phrase was used of Rome. It was also used, of course, in the Old Testament, and actually it was used of God, who is like God in the Old Testament. So it's there. All right, the beast was then given, verse 5. The beast was given a mouth, which is what the horn has in Daniel 7, to utter blasphemies. Right, and so the 2 fill in the blanks are it was given a mouth to utter blasphemies. Right? Of course, the blasphemy is this: who's like the beast? That's blasphemous, because that's what we're supposed to say about God. Who is like God? All right. And his blasphemy is against, and this is my translation and the way I've laid it out, and I think I put it down in the notes for you at the bottom of your notes. I think I did. I'm not sure. Today's not, but we'll get to it later. So the letter B, the blasphemy is against God. Okay, so he blasphemes, but he blasphemes God. Now, you know, the old adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I don't know if those you guys in India have ever have a saying like that, but that's an English saying, which by the way is not true. Sticks and stones do indeed break your bones, but names really actually do hurt a whole lot, and they hurt more than sticks and stones do. But that's another discussion. All right. You can blaspheme God all you want, it ain't gonna hurt him. You're gonna, okay, I'm gonna blaspheme God. Like, okay, ouch. It doesn't, you can't affect God. So the point actually is this: he doesn't actually blaspheme God. Instead, he blasphemes in the point 1 and point 2. He blasphemes his name and his tabernacle. Those are the two fill in the blanks. He blasphemes his name and his tabernacle. His name and his tabernacle. Now, letter small a. So I'm under like 5A, 5B, or whatever, 2A. All right. Small a. I translate this, and some translations go with this as well. That is those who dwell in heaven. So the next fill in the blank is those who are dwelling in heaven. Okay, so let's go back now. The beast has a mouth to utter blasphemies, and he's blaspheming God. And then John tells us what I mean by blaspheming God as two things: God's name and God's tabernacle, which is another word for temple. Tabernacle and temple are kind of synonymous, but not quite. Now, John tells us, however, what he means by the tabernacle. That's why it should be translated as that is. And that is those who are dwelling in heaven. The tabernacle that the beast is blaspheming is us. So let me see if I can remind ourselves of this or explain again. Those who are dwelling in heaven, remember in the book of Revelation, you have those who dwell on the earth dwellers, which is always a reference to the people who follow the beast and not those who are following God or Christ. Those who dwell in heaven refers to the people of God. Doesn't mean that we're actually in heaven. It means that heaven is our kingdom. We live on the earth, but our kingdom is God's kingdom, which is heaven. So don't think of heaven as spatial, as a place, as a location, right? We think, oh, God's in heaven and he's in this place. No, God's everywhere, right? And because he's everywhere, heaven is everywhere. So heaven is a reference to like where God's throne is, right? Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. So we, to follow as people of God, are distinguished from the nations by John saying, well, there's the earth dwellers who give their allegiance to the beast and wage war against the saints. And there are the heaven dwellers, which are God's people who dwell in God's heavenly tabernacle, even though right now it's on earth, right? And that's why Paul will say, you are the temple of God. Does that make sense? The beast is blaspheming us. He's attacking us. He's going after God by going after us. In fact, the next fill in the blank, letter C, is he has power to make war against the saints and to conquer them or overcome them. Same Greek word, overcome, conquer. Which is what the little horn does in Daniel 7. He makes war against the saints and he overpowers them. So what is being described is a satanically inspired war by utilizing the powers of the nations against God's people. Now you're thinking, oh, well, okay, that means, tanks and guns and knives. Not necessarily. That's not how the dragon necessarily wages war. Remember, Paul says, we wage war not against flesh and bones, but against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So we go back. Okay. So if you have your Bibles, if you're ready. Okay. So the fill in the blank there was to make war against it. Go back to chapter 11 again now. So remember, I argued that chapter 11 is the center climax of the story. It's John's prophecy. It's what's on the scroll. And the answer is it's the two witnesses that God sends out, which is us. Okay. So Revelation chapter 11 describes the two witnesses, verses 3-6 specifically. They minister for 1,260 days. They prophesy. They can shut up the sky so that it won't rain. They can make the waters into blood, and they can strike the earth with every plague as often as they want. Verse 7. When they finish their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss, and remember, sea and abyss are often synonyms. And the beast in Revelation 13 comes up out of the sea. It's the same one. Will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. Revelation 11:7 and Revelation 13:7 are basically saying the same thing. So what's happening in chapter 13 is it's explaining that this verse here, Revelation 11:7. What do you mean the beast comes up out of the abyss and makes war with them and overcomes them and kills them? Well, let me explain it. There's a dragon. He's been opposed to God's people all along. He tried to get Christ. Then he got Christ ascended into heaven, and Michael kicked him out of heaven. And now the dragon's roaming the earth, and he's filled with rage because he knows his time is short. That's chapter 12, verse 12. Chapter 12, verse 12. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil's come down to you having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. That's 12, verse 12. And what does the dragon do? Verse 17. Revelation 12, verse 17. The dragon was enraged with the woman who went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus, and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And now in chapter 13, we find out, how does he do it? He does it by empowering the nations to wage war against God's people. Okay, so that's your beast. Now, there's a couple of questions I want to go ahead and address, like who is the beast and and what does it mean for us today, which we'll discuss a little bit. And then there's some more notes at the bottom here, but let me stop because I kind of gave a lot. Any questions or comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So it's the dragon that's empowering the nations
Yes.
to wage war, not God.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Correct.
Right.
It's the dragon is empowering the nations. Exactly. Remember, and this goes back to the temptation of Jesus. If you bow down and worship me, the Satan says to Jesus, I will give you all the nations of the earth. Satan is the ruler of the kingdoms of the world now, presently. And then 1 Corinthians 15 says that God's giving those nations to Jesus, and ultimately Jesus will have dominion over them all. But right now, Satan's still in power. He's roaming the earth. He's not in heaven any longer. And he's really upset because he knows he only has a short time. So he's saying, I'll take as many down with him as he can, but he's enraged and he makes war against the saints. Okay. Now, let's remember, it's the devil, and he's brilliant. He's brilliant. So, the devil is the deceiver. Okay. So let me why does John combine the four beasts into one? What is this one beast? There's almost no question at all that the beast that John has in mind is Rome, the Roman Empire, whatever you want to say. It's Rome. That's the beast. There's no question of that's the case at all. Who is like the beast was said about the emperor, about Rome, things of that seems to be pretty clear. And the number 666 will kind of make that out as we get to the second beast, which we'll do next week. But notice that this one beast is all four beasts of Daniel together embodied as one beast. Now, one way to look at this is to say that Daniel was describing four specific kingdoms who have their rule in history, and that's fine because that's kind of what Daniel's saying. That makes sense. One kingdom, then another kingdom, then another kingdom, then another kingdom. Okay, no problem. And that John's picking up and saying, and that final kingdom is Rome, and John describes him as a beast. But we have seen throughout our study of the book of Revelation that 4 is symbolic in apocalyptic literature for completion, totality, fulfillment, with regard to creation. There's the 4 corners of the earth. There's the 4 winds. The nations are always described with people, tribes, tongues, and nations. It's 4. 4 represents all the nations. So could it be that Daniel's 4 kingdoms represent 4 kingdoms, but they also represent all the kingdoms of the world? And John is taking those 4 kingdoms, which really together comprise all the kingdoms of the world, and embodying them in one kingdom. Meaning, some people will say that the beast was Rome of John's day, and its past tense has nothing to do with us any longer. Some will say that the beast is a future Roman Empire. That's why the European Economic Community, The European market. There's 10 horns. There's okay. Whenever there's 10 nations in it, then it's going to be in it. But I don't know if you notice, they just skipped right over 10 and went to like 14 or whatever it is now, right? Well, Great Britain fell out, so maybe 3 or 4 are going to fall out. Eventually it's going to be 10 because it's a revived Roman Empire. That is the idea. So it's a future Rome. I will say, and I think probably the majority of biblical scholars are going to agree with this, that it was Rome for John's day, but actually Rome embodying all kingdoms throughout all of history. This is the war that Satan's been waging against the people of God from the beginning of time. That's chapter 12. It goes to the garden, and that war has never stopped. And he's not waging it just against Israel. He's waging it against all of God's people. Always has been, always will be, and therefore it embodies all nations. Now, what I'm not saying is that all nations are satanic. I'm not saying all nations are therefore always embody evil. No, not at all. Nations, there's a mix. Some are worse than others. Some are better than others. But ultimately, Satan is the ruler of the nations, or the one who empowers the nations to oppose God's people. So that's kind of a summation of it here. Okay, now, any thoughts here? We got like 5 minutes left, or 4 or 5 minutes left. I got a few more things I was going to cover. Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm in my
I can,
headset.
Marla. Yeah, no problem.
I have a question about like authority. So when the devil offered Jesus, I'll give you all, authority, and I'll give you all these nations, or I'll give you, all the lands. That was before Jesus died and rose again.
Mhm.
So what is the difference in the authority per se of a believer post Jesus's resurrection versus before that? And then like practically, like how does that play out in our faith? Like I grew up I didn't grow up as a believer, but in the college ministry I was in, people were always like, oh, I take authority over the spirit of this. And it was always all about authority. So like, can you go into that a little bit? Or
yeah, well, I'm going to try. I hope I can. And maybe your question, I think, really is the one that we really need to make sure we cover right now, and that is the point I was going to make also. And let me kind of jump there for a second, Marla, because it kind of answers your question also, and that is, notice verses 9 and 10 that we discussed last week, Revelation 13, 9 and 10. If anyone has an ear, let him hear, which is a catchphrase for means this is parabolic in a sense that it's the nature of the kingdom, and it's being revealed to those who come to Jesus for the answer, like the parables. And it's important. And then verse 10 ends with, here is the perseverance and faith of the saints. That means this is important for us to figure out what it's talking about, because we need to persevere through this. In other words, this is not something that's only relevant to the first century or only relevant to a future generation. It's clearly something that we need to figure out what this means. Now, we're not going to answer that in 5 minutes. It's going to take us probably 25 years. Right now, I've been processing this for 25 years, and I don't fully have the answer. And some of you have been processing it with me for a little while, but this is significant. All right, so first thing that is this, Marla. So in the Gospels, Jesus tells the disciples, I'm making you kings, and you will rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. In 1 Peter 2, verse 9, Peter says, you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, which is Israel language. It's Exodus 19 language. Israel was called by God in the Old Testament to come out from the nations, to be different from them. And they were called to establish a nation that embodied God's desire for justice and truth. Okay, so if you look at the laws of the Old Testament, they were intended to create a system of justice. Deuteronomy 15 says, there should be no poor among you. Of course, it goes on to say there's always going to be poor among you. But the point of that is, when you glean your fields, you're going to leave the corners so that the poor can eat. And if someone falls into debt, every 7 years, you're going to give them their land back. Or you're going to no interest rates. No, you can't charge interest to another Israelite. And you're going to forgive them their debts. And every 49 years, you're going to give them their land back. In other words, the laws were established so that Israel would be this nation in which justice and God's ultimate desire for peace and harmony within his creation, in other words, what Adam and Eve were supposed to do, would abound. So when the New Testament applies that language to the church or to us or to God's people today, you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. 1 Peter 2:9. I think this is, I'm hoping this is the answer to your question, Marla. That's what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to embody God's kingdom on earth by creating a system of equity and justice and care for the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized, as opposed to the nations, which even the good ones still benefit those in power, right? It still does. Those in power are still embodied, are still in a better place, even in the United States and other nations. And then you see ultimate nations like, Hitler or whatever, where only these people are going to be blessed. All right. We don't do things the way the nations do things. And another way of saying it will be the nations do things by war and militarism and oppression, but God's people do so by suffering violence for the sake of the nations. So I think that's the answer to your question, Marla. I hope, and it's the beginning at least, of what we're supposed to do. Now, the authority question is, I think it's just an abuse of the word. I think that's what's going on. I think they're using the word, our authority is only in Jesus, and we have authority through Jesus over the demonic entity. So I think you can say that, but I think they're abusing that. It sounds like it. They're abusing the word authority and applying it in a larger context of, well, we have authority over the demons so that they will come out only in and through Jesus. And some kind of come out only by much prayer and fasting, Jesus might say. But ultimately, the demons have to submit. But I think that would be the place where our authority stops. And I think to use it beyond that is probably to set up an abusive situation. So does that help?
Yeah, that totally helps. Thank you.
Good.
I have other
Sure.
questions, but I'll email them to you.
Well, that's fine. And we need to pick this conversation back up, right? Because I kind of ended abruptly here. This is a conversation that just needs to be processed and processed and processed and processed and processed, and thinking through it. And there's a lot more here, and we haven't only just begun, because now we have another beast to figure out what that is in the next chapter. And then we have to process, okay, what does that mean for us? And then we have to figure out what the harlot in 17 and 18. So we got a long way to go. And that's why I said, remember, if you've been with us the last few weeks, I said, this is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be a struggle. And eventually we're going to come out the other side with at least some level of understanding, even if it's only at the beginning, but don't want to lose sight of the story. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I have
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Helen.
So who exactly, what group of people are God's people?
That's in some ways, $1 million question, right? And that is, I think we would answer by saying those who follow the Lamb, but that's not right. That's not saying anything different than saying, well, those who are Christians. It's like, well, okay, yeah, right. And that's John's concern in writing the book. And that is, for John, it's the ones who persevere to the end. Or maybe the best way of saying it actually would be Revelation. You're not going to like this answer, but Revelation 12, verse 11. Revelation 12, verse 11. It says, they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. So to use Revelation's language, which again can lead us, I can lead you astray a little bit with this if we take this too strongly. To answer your question the way Revelation would answer it, it's the ones who overcome. And the ones who overcome are the ones who are willing to lay down their life for the Lamb, are willing to follow the Lamb by bearing his testimony. And again, it's not just necessarily your words, it's a life, and ultimately suffer for it. Now, again, that can sound like so harsh that half of us in the room are going to go, am I in or not? That I don't think that's the point. I think John's concern is, and we'll have to flesh this out with the second beast and with 17 and 18 also. And that John's concern is that we actually give in to the harlot for the sake of avoiding suffering, avoiding persecution. And maybe even a better way of answering the question, Helen, I think, is the parable of the sower. It's the one who bore fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold, despite the stones and despite the thorns, right? And that's, I think I mentioned it last week, the parable of the sower in Mark 4. It's worth rehashing that again also for us. But so quickly now, does that suffice for right now?
Yeah, that suffices for right now. But
Yeah.
what's coming up for me is this visual to be at the beginning. It was Eden was where things were going to be good, and then it was no, Israel is where things are going to be good, where
Right.
you have new laws. Now it's those who follow the Lamb is where things where you're called
Yes.
on to make new laws and make things right in the eyes of God.
Oh, yes, but that's perfect. Excellent synthesis, but add one more, and that is that's our goal and objective. But because we still live with sin and death, it won't actually happen until the New Jerusalem descends. So there's one more step, and that is the New Jerusalem descends, and then we'll drink freely from the river of life. We'll eat freely from the tree of life, and we'll see his face, and there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. So that's when it comes to fruition. But the question ultimately is, again, is what are we supposed to be doing in the meantime? And that's, we are supposed to be living like Eden or like the restoration of the new creation. That's what we're supposed to be trying to do. So yes. Yep.
Yes.
Very good. All right. Anthony, I think you had a question or comment.
Yeah, I was dovetailing on Marla's thing, and I think Helen, it ties in together as well. But I mean, would it be wrong to say that our authority genuinely rests in our submission or our desire for sacrifice, our surrender, if you will? Because if we're going to take up our cross as genuine believers,
Right.
and that's leading to one place.
Right.
And again, I don't want to scare anybody away either, but it's surrendering our sense of entitlement, our sense of self for the sake of the church and the body as a whole.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that way of putting it. That's right. And that's why I think the danger of using authority is that we've actually put ourselves up when Jesus says, no, I want you to put yourselves down, right? The first shall be last shall be first. And it's this life of submission, this life. And so as soon as we use authority, I think we're using it as a power play. It could be, I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but from what I understand from Marlon, I think it is. So I think that's well said. Yep. Very well. Okay. So now we stop and say, well, we got a lot of praying to do, right? Because A, we're not good at this. We're trying. B, this is not the message we wanted to hear. Okay. You can kind of understand why Jesus had 5,000 following him, but when they got to the cross, he only had a couple dozen and 120 in the upper room a few days after the resurrection. It's like, yeah, okay. This is the call. So, all right, I'm going to turn the Facebook Live off. Goodbye to all of you. Again, the Determined Truth podcast is beginning a series starting this week as I speak in the third week of March of 2023. And you guys on YouTube also on the book of Revelation. So you can tune into the Determined Truth podcast, determinedtruth.com. If you want to be part of the Zoom Bible study, then send me your email address. I can send you the link so you can be part of the Bible study also. And if you want to just send your questions in, because I know some of you can't make it to the study, send your questions email me at rdalrymple19@gmail.com. All right. Well, that being said, bye. All right. And let me stop the recording.